at the Griffin Center for Healthy Living this evening. This is our first class of 2026. We had some people reach out to us and ask for something on sourdough. Is that person in the class today? No? Oh, someone had in one of our classes had said, we would love to have a sourdough presentation, or how would you make that? So Katie remembered that, and we said, you know what, let's kick off the new year with a sourdough, right? We all know sourdough and the fermentation process is much better than the traditional white bread that we get at the store. So here we are. So here at the Center for Healthy Living, we try to promote community education on a variety of healthcare topics. They vary in nature, but we like to follow some type of healthy calendar. So we thought for January this would be, let's kick off the year with a good start. Let's try to eat a little cleaner. I know a lot of people are going with dry January, limiting alcohol. We said, well, we are in the nutrition and health business. Let's talk about food. So we're doing the sour bread today. Next Thursday we have one called Clean Eating Chicken Chili, which is again sold out, which thank you to everybody. So what we do here is we promote lifestyle change, and we try to educate people on the importance of nutrition and how nutrition can fight chronic disease. Whether you have diabetes, pre-diabetes, cardiovascular issues, simple obesity with people that have waist circumferences and BMI over a certain number. We all know through the research that if you can look at these chronic diseases that we are dealing with, prevalence, kidney, renal, diabetes, almost all of them could be tied back to a nutrition issue. So we promote healthy lifestyle change through nutrition, eating better, introducing things like exercise, the importance of the pillars of lifestyle medicine, social connection, physical activity, sleep, and things like that. So I want to thank everyone for coming today. I want to thank anyone who's watching on Facebook. And tonight we have Caty Poole. She used to be a former executive director of Massaro Farm in Woodbridge. I apologize, that was a lot. And she's been collaborating with Griffin now this whole past year. We had a great year in 2025. We did a lot of great topics. So we're looking forward to a successful 2026, and thank you all for being here tonight. So Katie, I'll let you get us going.
Okay. Yeah, so welcome. Those of you who are just coming in, welcome. Again, my name is Caty Poole. I am not a nutritionist. I am not a master gardener, but we talk about a lot of subjects here. Most of my information just comes from being in the food and farming community over the last 15 years, working with a lot of people directly on different dietary restrictions, different issues in maybe their health balance or their digestive systems. I have a couple members of my family that struggle with those kinds of things. And so I have long been a fermented foods enjoyer, I guess, a supporter, and really in the last 10 years have started to broaden what I'm doing. And that's what we're featuring here tonight. We've done homemade sauerkraut, which I've brought and shared with some of you before if you've been here. So we are featuring sourdough, which is a naturally leavened bread. The starter can survive for a very long time. And like Michael said, this is not only great as a proactive health nutrition balance for the body, but these kinds of foods can bolster your immunity, which is particularly good at this time of year. There's some really virulent virus strains out now. So let me start out by saying that there are as many ways to make sourdough bread as there are types of breads. So whatever you're doing, you are not doing it wrong. This is meant to give you some guidelines, some basics, tell you what things to look out for, let you know that you're doing it right. And then once you get the basics down, really feel free to experiment with different flours that work for you. I will get into, if you have any gluten sensitivity and you have questions about that, we'll get into that a little bit later on. Because sourdough takes time, it doesn't require a lot of your time, but it has to sit for a long time, whether the starter is developing and that is your culture, or whether you're just letting it rise to bake. So, I'm going to do things a little bit out of order, as I was mentioning to those who arrived earlier, but we're going to recap in order at the end, just to reiterate what the process is, so that you don't get confused. So sourdough does take, and it depends on if you do want to rely and use some active yeast, if you're early on in your sourdough preparations, don't feel bad about doing that, just to make sure that you're using all this flour and you don't want things to go to waste. You can use a little bit of yeast just to be safe, but we are going to send you home with a naturally cultivated sourdough starter, and that's a half a cup that you can use, take home and feed, and use to make your own sourdough at home. So the first thing I want to say is I proofed some of my dough that I mixed first thing this morning, and this was put in the oven at from 2 to 3 roughly, about 35 minutes today. So I took that out just in time to come here. I have another one that's ready to go, part of that same dough mix, and I'm just going to show you what I did. So are the overhead cameras working right now? Yes. All right, great. So once your dough has gone through a couple different processes, and I'm going to back up in a moment, so just bear with me, you're not missing anything. Once it has gone through the process of the very first rising session, which is called an auto-lyse, your second session, which is called your bulk rise, you get to the final proof, and that's where this dough is right here. So I've got this, and the mixture on the recipe card is actually for, I took and divided in half. So this dough, if you doubled that batch, that's normally what you would see. This is from King Arthur Flour, and on their website, it's actually double what's on your card. So doubling that recipe, which is what's on their site, is going to give you these 2 loaves. You can see what I've got here. All right, so these were both proofing today. I'm going to try to get as much of this off here as I can. I have preheated the oven, which also takes a while because you are going to bake this at a higher temp. And what that does is that will give you that sort of quick rise that you want to make lots of nice air bubbles in your sourdough. I have preheated the oven, and I have brought my Dutch oven for you today. So this is the final proofing stage that we are using here. I've got a floured surface, and I'm just going to, because you're using a naturally leavened product, you're not doing a lot of kneading that you would do in a typical bread where you have added yeast. So instead of like pushing and rolling, you are just pulling and folding the dough. And what this is doing is like creating all those nice air pockets. And if you were closer, you might even hear a couple of these bubbles popping. All right, so I've got some flour on there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my Dutch oven, which has been heating in the oven while it's been preheating, throw this bread in there, and that'll get going so that that'll come out. Now the other thing about sourdough is if you really want it to preserve this nice crust where you get that nice little, tap, that nice hard crust, which you don't have to, you want to let it sit for like 45 minutes to an hour, which is the hardest part about baking this bread, because you want to slice into it as soon as you take it out of the oven. So I've got this nicely formed loaf. You don't want to forget to cut some openings in it. And the reason you do that is to allow the loaf to bloom, to allow the steam to escape, which is part of what lends itself to the crustiness of the bread.
When you're cutting, I just want to see if we can show them on the camera here. So those of you can see on this camera here how she just put some slices. I think it's that camera right there. That one? So everyone can see that. Yeah. It's funny, you know how your phones listen to you sometimes when you're talking about things, right? So I'm not kidding. We were talking about doing this, and within a day or two, I started seeing sourdough loaves popping up on Facebook. But the designs were so intricate, like they were like
people get really elaborate.
I mean,
and
it was.
You can do that too.
I couldn't believe that. I'm like, how did they do that? And it was just by cuts.
So I've preheated my Dutch oven. There is a little bit of oil in there, but I'm doing this on parchment paper. So it's going to make it much easier to take out. And I'm going to put this oven in the oven, and then we're going to start from the top.
How many of us here have a Dutch oven at home?
Yeah, and you don't have to,
iron.
and we'll talk about that too.
They're fairly inexpensive.
I'm just setting the timer here, folks, so give me a second.
Maxx, you can get them for anywhere from $10 to $20, depending on the size. If you want a really nice one, you're going to pay probably $40 to $50.
I'm actually not sure if I'm doing that correctly. Since I haven't used that timer before, I'm going to do it on my phone. So we're going to set a timer for 30 minutes, and then I'm going to check it, and this is at 450 degrees. And again, you're going to see varying instructions on different temperatures. Anywhere, probably the lowest I've seen is 425 degrees up to 500. Sometimes the recipe will say 500 and then back off after the first 10-15 minutes. So there is going to be some variation there. Don't be confused by that. And you can experiment too with your oven, because everybody's oven is a little bit different. All right, the other thing I want to show you is actually mixing the dough. So am I on camera here?
The middle. So yes, you are definitely on camera.
Yes?
And then
Back over
and then
here.
better there, yeah, because
Okay.
the cameras are picking
Okay.
it up. Yeah.
So what I'd like to do is, I've got all these starters going, and this is what I developed to give you your starters for today. And we're going to pass a couple of these around so you can take a look inside and see what it looks like. These have been growing or cultivating over the course of 10 days, right? So, and I'll talk about what that means in a second, but I just want you to see what an active and good smelling culture sourdough looks. So sourdough, you will often hear as a term referred to both your starter or your culture and the bread itself. So sometimes that's a little bit confusing, but I'm going to pass one of these down either row. Yeah, just do one each row. Take a look. You can see from the top, you're going to see the bubbles, and then just give it a little one each row. And then I'm going to use these. Yeah. So you want to look at the consistency from the top. You can see that it's bubbly. I have tape on here because this is my mechanism for marking, like where it was when I first put it in, and that's the way I check to see how far it's actually risen. And you want to get a whiff of the smell. So it should have just a slightly tangy smell to it. And again, that's going to vary depending on the type of flour that you are using. All right, so I have pre-measured the ingredients per the recipe. The one you have is half of what I'm doing, okay? So I just want you to know that. So I have, this is going to ask me for 2 cups of starter. And the reason why I want to show you this step and start it early is because the early on development of the dough is that's probably the trickiest part. And so if I start it now, we can fold it a couple of times while we're here in class, and you can see the consistency and it's changing as the gluten is developing in the bread. All right. So let me grab a spoon. So I've got my ripe starter here. And you can measure your ingredients by volume, or you can measure them by weight. And I do have a kitchen scale back here, and I am doing the starter by volume, but all of the other ingredients I have done by weight. And I'll talk about why you might want to do that. So this is 1 cup. Got to make sure not to use all my starter, because I want to make sure I take home starter today. Yeah. Did everybody smell that smell? Slightly vinegary? All right, as long as you got a sense of that. The very first step, as I was talking about earlier, of making a sourdough is the autolyse, which is when the gluten begins to develop and the dough begins to really take a shape. So there are different approaches to this. When I started doing this about 6 or 7 years ago, most of what I was seeing recommended not adding the salt to your dough until you got past this process, because salt is an inhibitor to yeast. So yeast likes to feed on sugar, and right now it's going to, like the natural yeast is actually feeding on the sugar or the carbohydrate that is there present in the flour. Now, but I am starting to see more recipes that kind of skip that, I guess because people were forgetting to add their salt. So I am going to hold off. I'm going to just do the flour and water. Now, oftentimes I've pre-measured my water. So the starter culture is very thick and doughy. Did you see that as I was pouring it in? It can get very stringy. It can get very messy when you're like doing your feeding. So just like baking a sweet product, I find that it is often easier to do your liquids first and your dry later. So just think about that. You're baking just like you were baking cakes or a pie, cookies, where you're doing liquids first. So oftentimes your flour will go in much better, and it'll be much easier to mix if you do the liquidy part first. So you see how I might even get my hands in this because it's much easier to break up this piece by getting this blended with the water. It's going to make it much easier to get that flour integrated if I sort of break apart. So I've just got room temperature water here. I do it slightly warm when I'm at home. Again, the main thing about making sourdough is home is how long your dough takes to rise and how long your culture takes to develop. The times that you're going to see in recipes, they're all guidelines. It is largely based on the temperature of your room or your kitchen. So just keep that in mind, because you might have to make much longer than you think for things to develop. Don't be afraid. You're not doing it wrong. All right, so now I'm going to add my flour, and I'm going to mix this. Everybody still seeing this? Okay, great. And I do have everything I have made for you here today. There are so many different good quality flours to choose from, and some people really want to stick to maybe whole grains. I always try to buy products and use products for these classes that are easily available in the grocery store. So King Arthur flour is great. No, that'll actually be too thick. It's going to come together very quickly. Thank you. It's readily available in the grocery stores. You can try other ones. The reason why I like it, and the bag is right here in front of me, is because it's going to list the protein content right on the front. So instead of me having to look at the back label and say, how much protein is in this by gram, it's telling me right on the front, the 12.7%, and some go even up into 13%, which is quite high. But when you have a higher protein content like that, that means for sourdough specifically, or for naturally leavened breads, that gluten is really going to develop and give you a nice chewy texture for your loaf. So that's what I like about King Arthur. Very specific. I'll talk about developing the starter and why I start with wheat in a few minutes. All right, I need a little bit more flour in here, and I think I've got some ready to go. So when you first mix this together, this is going to be quite shaggy, right? It's going to be a little bit wet. You want it to come away from the sides of the bowl. See how it's doing? So it needs to at least stick together, but it is going to seem pretty wet, and that's okay. So I'm going to let this sit for about 30 minutes while we go through some other things. And then I'm going to do this again, and you're going to see how the dough is going to get much smoother, even just over 30 and 60 minutes. So I'm going to cover this, switch gloves. It's a very messy process, but it's fun. It's great for kids to do, especially if they like to get their hands in it. All right. Switch over here. I've got a couple of towels. All right, so I'm just going to set this aside. Let me see. And let that sit for the same amount of time that our bread is in the oven. Let me get into the basics. So I'm going to back up a little bit now, talk about from beginning to end, give you some of these like guidelines, troubleshooting tips.
So
and then
we're just to clarify, we're going to switch over to your PowerPoint now.
Yeah, let's switch over to the PowerPoint, and then we'll go back. And the other thing I will show you hands-on before you leave today is how to feed your starter, because we are going to send you home with some. So we want you to be able to know how to do that. Okay? All right. So why do we make sourdough? As I was mentioning earlier, sourdough is a term that we use both to talk about the culture, but also the bread itself. And this is a naturally fermented product. So all you're doing is putting flour and water together. letting the yeast both naturally present in the flour itself. There's like chemical reactions going on, as well as there is always natural yeast present in the air around us, unless you're in a clean room. And you're just letting them go to work. So you're letting those ferment, and this can last quite a long time. But what happens during that fermentation process is it's going to break down the acids and the enzymes in the flour and make it much more easy for your body to process and digest, but also take up nutrients. So if you've got something in your bread, if you've got a little bit of addition, if you've got some nuts and seeds and you want your body to take up the magnesium and the iron from those additions, it's just going to make it much more readily for your body to absorb those nutrients. All right. Couple different terms, and I do have a glossary page as well. Sometimes this initial culture can be referred to as a sponge or a preferment. Those are just fancy bakery terms. Don't get put off by those. It all means the same thing. The other great thing about sourdough is you can store it for quite a long period of time. So generally speaking, and we'll talk about this again when we're showing you how to feed, does everybody here go through more, like about a loaf of bread at home a week? Does that sound about right? Okay, so if you're doing more than that, you might have kids at home, that's fine. You can double this, you can grow your starter and make 2 loaves a week. But essentially what you can do is keep this culture in your refrigerator, take it out the day or maybe even the evening before, just depending on what schedule works for you. You know, feed your dough so that you always want to set some aside so you have some for next time, and then you're going to use the rest to make your dough for your bread for that week. So even though you will have discard when you are going through that feeding process, it's not a ton, right? And then generally keeping it in the refrigerator means you are feeding it about once a week. Can it go longer? Certainly. If you end up not eating bread or you're away for a few days and you haven't consumed all your bread and you don't want to make it, that's okay. I mean, I have actually kept starters in my refrigerator for up to 3 months. Now, what will happen, you do want to cover it if you know you're going to be away on vacation or you're not going to get to it for a while because it's the holidays. Cover it so it doesn't dry out. But again, it can store for longer periods of time. That culture, once it's been developed out in the open air, can be stored in that refrigerated temperature for quite a long time. You will start to see a separation, so the liquid will rise to the top, and that liquid is often referred to as a hooch. You can either stir it back in, or if it turns darker, you can pour it off. So unless you're getting like an orange or a yellow, you know, which looks moldy or it gets really foul smelling, you'd be surprised at how long it can last. If you are baking bread more or you want to keep your culture out of the refrigerator, you can do that. That would require a daily feeding, because what's going to happen is all of the sugars in that flour are going to get consumed very quickly. The refrigerator just slows that process down, and then it's going to need more to keep it alive. Otherwise, it's going to die. So that's why when you leave it out and it's at a warmer temperature, it's going to consume that food. It needs more food more readily. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. All right. Okay. So starting from the beginning, just actually, let me go over these terms first. So I already mentioned autolyse, and autolyse is that first step, and I will show you in a few minutes when we're done with the presentation, of taking your starter, and that's actually, sorry, what you saw me do was creating the first mix of your dough, and that's what's sitting back here. The crumb, if you haven't referred to that or heard of that, that's sort of when you cut open the bread and you want to see those nice airy holes. Now, depending on what you're baking with and what flours you're using, maybe you're not baking sourdough to get a nice light loaf. Maybe you're doing it because you want to use certain whole grains, or you want to use the sourdough mixture to make other things. Baked products, waffles, biscuits, pasta. There's a lot of different ways in which you can use this. So you don't have to be cultivating a sourdough culture just to make bread. So keep that in mind. Gluten is the protein in the wheat that is developing and that gives a structure to our bread. Levain is just another one of those terms like preferment or sponge. That's actually when you split your sourdough starter and take, if you see levain, that is the portion that you are taking and adding to your recipe. Maintenance means keeping your culture alive and doing a regular feeding. So I talked about the long rise, which is the long period that will come after this first auto-lyse stage. And then the proof is the final rising, usually about an hour, but it can vary, again, depending on how much bread dough you have, what kind of flour you're using, and what the temperature is in the room. Between 20 and 60 minutes is that last proof before you throw it in the oven or otherwise use your starter. And then ripe is just a term that is used to refer to your culture once it is ready to use. How do you know that your culture is ready to use? So that's why I wanted to pass it all around to you. Usually from 5 to 7 days is enough. I wanted to go extra long on this because I wanted you to have some really nice developed starters, but also this can depend on a different flour that you are using, and again, the temperature in your kitchen or the room where you are starting these. So a minimum of 5 to 7 days. These have been developing for 10 days, and you are going to see a nice bubbly action. You're going to see it rising almost double. Sometimes it starts to slow down as it's developed a little bit longer. Over a 24-hour period. Again, that can be longer if your kitchen or your house is kept at 65 or 66. I have a very sunny kitchen and a very large radiator. So even if there's like a sunny day, it gets very warm in my kitchen. One day during this whole cycle, we had cloudy temps and it got a little warm last Thursday or Friday. And as the heat was not coming on, my kitchen was not warm as it had been the couple days before. So I noticed it was taking a little bit longer for things to happen. There's a reason why, and you will see when you look at different recipes online, most often when you are starting a culture or maintaining a culture or feeding it, it really helps to have it in a cylindrical container that you can see. So if you have a clear jar, mason jars are great because you can mark on the jar, see what it was when you put it in there, and then sort of measure its activity as it's expanding and growing. So you can see that these are quite crusty. I even cleaned them up a little bit for you so you can see what was going on, but I've had them in these jars for, again, 10 days. There are lots of different things, but this is different than having it in a, like I used to do it in a bowl like this, but you've got these graduated sides that can be very deceptive to like how much it's actually growing and expanding. Does everybody get that? Is that clear? Okay, cool. All right, so again, talking about flours, as many different ways to do this as there are flours and types of bread on the planet. So basically, I wanted to do something for you today that was very approachable and made it very easy to track, like a good quality bread flour, which is easy to find in most of our area grocery stores. You can try lots of different flours at home. If you have, or if you are doing this for anybody, or just you want to experiment in developing a sourdough culture that is not based on a gluten flour, there are other flours you can use, a rice flour, potato flour. These will often require the addition of xanthan gum, which is sort of replacing the gluten that is present in regular wheat-based flours. There are other recipes out there for, what's the other thing that I was going to say? The other type of ingredients that would require, like, there's not enough starch in the flour for the yeast to feed on, and so sometimes you need to add a little bit of sugar. So just keep that in mind. It will always tell you in those recipes, but it is possible, okay? Some basic things you will want to have. So I saw Mike ask if people have a Dutch oven. Many people, when I started doing this, I didn't have a Dutch oven either, and I was just baking it on, I had a baking sheet, and then later I had a pizza stone. You might not get the same nice hard crust developed, because what's happening is in that enclosed space, the bread is releasing steam, and that container is actually trapping it, which is nice. But that doesn't have to be, I mean, you can actually make this in a bread maker. If you have a bread machine at home, I personally have not done that. What that usually involves is a different process for like stopping it midway, letting it rise longer, and then putting it back in to bake. But it is doable. So basic things are, you're going to want, a baking sheet, some nice bowls. You're going to want some clear vessels to actually watch and feed and keep an eye on your starter. Good flour. I think the recipe does say something about non-chlorinated water. I live in the city. I don't use non-chlorinated water. That's a personal option these days, and some people are very sensitive to like chlorine and fluoride in the water. If you left your water out overnight, it basically is the equivalent of using distilled water from the grocery store. The other ingredient you're going to want is some good quality salt, and that is it. So this is one of, like, in terms of ingredients, one of the easiest things that you can make. I do use, if you want to try, I was actually doing most of our starters here, and you'll see when I measure towards the end to feed the starter, I'm actually doing it by volume, but I measured all the ingredients, as I said, for the bread dough today. Using a kitchen scale, this was $12 on Amazon. It does grams and ounces. So that's nice to have. A couple of scrapers, which are super great, especially like there are times when you're first working with your dough where it can get quite sticky. But remember I said that sourdough is not a kneaded bread. So you want to treat it very delicately. So you can use the scraper just, to kind of like turn the dough and fold it over on itself. Again, getting those nice bubbly air pockets. Just some basic things. I also like to use, I didn't used to do this, but you can certainly mix your dough in any kind of bowl that's easy for you to work in. I have actually started proofing mine in my bowls with a towel that I put flour on. It just makes it much easier to get out and to handle, and then your flour and water gets amazingly crusted, and it can require lots of soaking to get off your things. So just a heads up if you do have linen towels.
Katie, before you continue,
Yes.
I might have missed this. Did you mention why the kneading doesn't have to happen with the sourdough?
So what you have developed is a naturally leavened product, and the first step of mixing your naturally leavened starter with your flour and water is creating that chemical combination or action that's actually creating the structure. In a kneaded bread, you are adding yeast, and you actually have to work it in order to develop the gluten, but you don't have to do that in a sourdough, and that's why.
That's what
you want to treat it very lightly. If you're doing a whole grain, a whole grain is going to be heavier, it's going to be denser. I have a friend who does a mixture of grains, and she only uses about 20% regular flour, and the rest is like whole grain, a rye and a wheat, and it's pretty dense. That's the way she likes her bread. So yeah, it doesn't have the light fluffy crumb that you're going to see when we cut this open today.
Thank you. And, I know she mentioned this, but please feel free to ask a question. We'll answer as we go.
Yeah, I know I've been talking a lot, so I did want to stop here and just say, does anybody have any questions so far?
Oh.
Yeah.
So I'm going to hand you the mic if that's okay.
And then we'll do you in the back there.
Just so we can hear you on the speaker. That's
Yeah.
it. Thank you.
Hi, Katie.
Hi, Jamie.
I want to ask you a question about the salt. You said good salt. From a previous class I took with you, you said to use a salt that has iodine, right? Or the nutrient that you need?
That is one of the nutrients. There are other trace minerals. Some people might have a sensitivity to that. So if you want to use table salt, that's okay. But a lot of minerals get stripped out of salt, particularly like a table salt. And so I prefer to just try different, more quality salts that say that they still have the minerals in them. So I am using Redmond's today, and that's one that you'll see me use a lot.
Okay, can you get that at the grocery store? Because I haven't been able to find it, but I haven't looked at that brand.
Okay. I'm not sure about like Big Y or Stop and Shop or ShopRite, but I know that I have found this at Big Y, or sorry, not Big Y. I live not far from Edge of the Woods in New Haven. Yeah, so you can often see it in a pouch, right? So they'll sell it in a bigger. I have actually a pouch, and that's sort of the shaker I use, but the pouch is probably worth 3 or 4 of those. So it comes in a thing that you can refill your shaker with. And then you had a question.
I did.
Yeah.
So how big of a Dutch oven do you generally use?
Yeah, so they can come in different sizes, right? I mean, this one is actually quite large. So if I were making this recipe, which actually makes 2 loaves, again, the one you have, I cut it in half, so it wouldn't be overwhelming. But if you go to the King Arthur website, their basic recipe is 2 loaves. If I didn't divide them, it would be enough to bake all of that together. So I would have a larger, oftentimes we see them in the grocery store, the bakery section of the store, they can be quite large, right? And so that would be like this whole recipe together as one dough. So it just depends on what you can break it down, right? You can divide your dough into small enough loaves that will fit in there. You can also just do it on a flat cookie sheet if you wanted more of a bread loaf shape, or in a, what's that company that does all the stoneware that I can't think of? What's that? Pampered Chef. Yes, if you have a Pampered Chef loaf pan and you wanted it for sandwiches, you could certainly do that as well. Does that help? Okay, all right. Okay, So a couple other things are nice to haves. Yes, certainly a Dutch oven. As I mentioned, when I first started making this, I was not doing it in the Dutch oven. Then one was gifted to me. The universe sometimes comes to you in nice ways. Parchment paper, which I showed you, I did use. It's going to make it real easy to get that bread out of there. A lame, which is a scoring knife, and there is a picture of it here in the corner. Honestly, I have a couple of really nice sharp paring knives like this at home. So again, nothing fancy. You want to cut a couple of scores. It just is going to let the steam escape from your bread. So that's all you want to do, but you can get quite fancy with it. A brat form or couche, or there's multiple different names for this. This is a basket or a bowl often that has its own lining, right? So you can see that one here. This is like a linen towel with an elastic that fits specifically over a bowl. Sometimes they have the ridges built into the bowl or in the basket that just give you a nice design. So if you're making this on a regular basis, you want it to be nice and fancy, you could certainly do that. And then of course a bread machine, which we already talked about. So this is a sourdough loaf that a friend of mine was making that I said. She uses a special kind of red wheat that she buys online. And this is her mostly whole grain. So this is like 80% whole grain, 20% white, just so that she gets enough fluff in there. But she really likes a dense bread. She puts a lot of seeds in it. So again, I mentioned to you earlier, you can certainly make any culture or sourdough starter with a basic flour. You can use white flour, you can unbleached flour. If you are striving to make sourdough and you really want the tang, my husband loves that tang that comes in the bread, and that's what especially what is his favorite about sourdough. You will get a stronger flavor, number one, the more your starter is developed, so over time it can develop those flavors. Also starting the culture with a whole grain wheat. So a rye or a whole wheat just to do the developing piece. So here's an example. If I had a bag of whole wheat flour and then I wanted to bake my bread with the regular flour, as I was developing my culture, feeding it each day, and then feeding it on a weekly basis after I make my loaf, I am only going to add to the culture using the rye or the wheat. So that whole grain, I have found in my experience that using a whole grain flour is going to give you a much stronger flavor in that tang department. You can also add a tiny amount of vinegar when you're doing the mixing with the water, and I say a tiny, maybe a teaspoon. You don't want to overdo it because you don't want to kill the chemical development, the action and reaction that's happening in your dough development. So that is a way, if you want, to really develop and keep some nice tang and strong sourdough flavors in your bread. So you would only be developing and feeding with the whole grain, but when you go to mix, you can certainly do a mixture. You can do half white, half wheat. You can do 80-20. That's entirely up to you. As I was saying, as many ways to make it as there are types of bread. Is that clear to everybody? Okay. Also,
Okay,
yes.
we do have a question.
Yes, great.
Jennifer Ellen, if you're still watching, it says her question was, how strict do you have to be on feeding times each day
Yeah.
when you're feeding the starters?
All right. So again, you want to watch the reaction of what's happening in your culture, and generally I would say 12 to 24 hours. So shorter, if you have a very warm kitchen and you see your culture growing, like I have marked the base of this right with my tape, and so I could see how high it was getting in the jar, and that tells me how quickly it's developing, which means it's eating the sugars in that flour. If it's quite full after 12 hours from evening to morning or morning to evening, I'm going to want to feed it again. Generally, as I was doing this, 24 hours is a good cycle. So again, everything that you are doing is very much based on the temperature in your environment. So you have to pay more attention to observation than sticking to a strict schedule. Got it?
Thank you.
All right. In about 2 minutes, my timer is going to go off, and I'm going to pull that loaf out and check it. It might need 5 more minutes, but I'm just going to keep going until that happens. So again, lots of good quality flours, better than, there's nothing wrong with Pillsbury. When I started doing this, again, I was using regular, I was using an unbleached wheat or maybe unbleached flour, just regular store shelf. As I've done it more, I've started to use a higher protein bread. Bob's Red Mill, which we now see in many grocery stores, has a lot of different varieties, and they make different flours as well, including a gluten-free mix. So they have some great recipes on their website. The recipe I am sharing with you today is from King Arthur flour. I find that I go back to them more and more all the time. They have some wonderful short, I almost was going to show one today, but we didn't even need it. They have some wonderful real 30-second clips of like how to tell when your starter is ready, or you know, just different things along the way in your sourdough journey. They also even have an online class that you can enroll in if you really wanted to do that. But they have a wonderful website with lots of different resources. And then of course, trying different flours. So it's entirely up to you. So I did already mention about doing gluten-free, and of course following directions for feeding and the possible additional use of either xanthan gum or sugar to make that yeast production happen. All right, so let me just check this timer, because before I show you how to feed, I feel like I'm going to get interrupted. Yep. All right, so there it is. All right, so let me just make sure room here. No, I'm just going to pull this out, and it's heavy, so I just want a clear path to and I will check it. Yes. You can close the doors if you want behind me. By the way, your oven loses about 10 degrees every 5 seconds you leave the door open. So, all right. So can you all see that? No. Oh, sorry. We're on presentation. Okay. We're on presentation mode. So I've got a really light, I'm just going to do this quickly, but this is pretty light. It's not as dark as the one I already made for you. I'm going to put it back in for 5 more minutes. All right. Because I want a little bit more golden brown color in that. Sorry, Josh. I didn't mean to throw you off there back in the control room. Yeah, so when you're baking at a high temperature, your oven loses a lot of temperature quickly when you leave the door open. So try not to leave your door open. All right. So getting started and the steps for feeding. So what you are going to do is you are going to start in the very beginning with a half a cup of water, or 113 grams of water, and a cup of flour. That is it. Each day, and then you blend that together. You're going to leave that sit for your 12 to 24 hours. And then you're going to check and see. And when it's about double in capacity, you are going to pour out half a cup, which you are going to use that is your basis to continue growing your culture. The rest is going to be your discard. So I just mentioned starting with the ingredients, half a cup of water and a cup of flour. That's about a cup and a half of ingredients, right, by volume. Each day after that, as you are developing it, you are going to have a half a cup of your starter, and add another half a cup of water, and a cup of flour. So essentially you're dealing with 2 cups of ingredients each day. And each day as you feed it, you're going to take a half a cup, and that's what you're going to continue to feed, and the rest is your discard. So if you are developing your own culture, you are doing this every day for, like I said, about 5 to 7 days. We're going to send you home with a culture. Now you have something that is already started for you, so you will only need to feed it once a week, or maybe once every 2 weeks as you're using it. So you are getting a half a cup, and you are going to add a half a cup of water, or the 113 grams, and a cup of flour, and mix it. You're going to wait to see that it gets nice and bubbly. You can either keep feeding it, or you will have a basis of a sourdough culture that you can then use to make your bread. Because the recipe in front of you calls for a cup of starter. And you can look for different recipes too. Sometimes it only requires a half a cup of starter. That's like the minimum amount. I made a double batch for you here tonight, so that's why I used 2 cups. So that is what you are going to do to develop and keep your feeding going. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes, in the back.
We have a question from Carol. Here, Carol.
When you put it in the refrigerator, do you keep it uncovered?
No.
No, you do cover it.
Yes, you want to cover it for a couple different reasons. So you don't want it to dry out, and things can really dry out in the refrigerator. And I do have another picture of that that I'm going to show you in a second.
So we'll go back to your slide deck.
Yeah. Sorry, did he switch over? He did momentarily. Sorry, Josh. Okay. Sorry back there. Yeah. So you can see, you already got to see, we passed around the jars. This is what you want to see when you look into your jar. You see plenty of bubbles on the surface there. You want to smell a light smell, right? It's very gentle. It's not a lot. And again, the development of that starter really depends on the temperature in your room, okay? So you can see here, when I started making this, that tape is the top line of where I started out with. In other words, like when I put all my ingredients in the jar, the tape, the top of that blue tape was the top of my ingredient line, and then you can see how it nearly doubled, right? That's what I'm showing you here. I'm showing you that as the culture is developing, it's definitely expanding. And then I'm going to pour it off, reserve half a cup, discard the rest, and you can keep the discard, and I'll talk about that in a moment because there are many different uses. You can even take the discard and start another one if you want. So start growing another culture. Just separate them, half a cup of each, and then you'll have 2 starters going. There's nothing wrong with doing that. You might want to try different breads. So you might want to grow it so that you can make more things. So that's the reason why you might want to do that, especially since I'm giving you a half a cup to start. All right. So these are the general steps because we've been doing them out of order, okay? So you've got your starter. The day you want to use your starter to bake your bread, I like to bring it to room temperature. So I will often take it out of the refrigerator at a minimum of an hour before I start to mix things. You can do it longer, but I wouldn't do it less. I find that it is bubbly and reactive if it's at room temperature as opposed to when you're pulling it just out of the fridge and it's kind of been kept in this dormant state for a day or longer. So going from 40 degrees to 70 degrees is going to activate and release the bubbles in that starter. So I like to bring it to room temp. Again, you're going to take what you need for your recipe, half to a cup. You're going to take the rest, and what you should have is at least a cup and a half left after or a cup to a cup and a half left of this, right? Because you've now taken the little bit you need to mix your dough. You're going to have some left, and you can then do your measurement where you take a half a cup and add some water and add some flour, put it back in the fridge, and then you're still going to have a little bit left over. So you can either toss it or you can keep a discard going in your fridge, and at the end of the week, maybe you want to make some pancakes or some waffles or a blueberry sour cream coffee cake if you have company coming. So the point is that you can incorporate that discard. You don't have to feel like you are wasting, especially if you're spending money for a quality flour. Oftentimes it feels like you are throwing ingredients away. So if you don't want to do that, save your discards. I had discards from I had 5 different starters going, and I had a bowl full of discard. Kept it covered in the fridge. I used about a cup and a half in this coffee cake. All right, so then you have fed your starter, put it back in the fridge. You've now got your half a cup or cup. You start mixing. It's the day you're going to make your bread. You mix it up. The first step is mixing all of your ingredients together, or everything but your salt, and that is your autolyse process. I'm going to show you that in a minute. I just want to finish getting through these slides. Then you will do your rise, and that is usually once the dough the gluten has activated, it gets nice and smooth. You can see it holds a shape, and you want it to at least double in size. Again, today my oven was on, my kitchen was warm. It probably doubled in size in about 3.5, maybe 4 hours. Sometimes it could be as long as 6 hours. This is one of the steps, this long rise, or even both the rise and the proof at the end, where sometimes recipes can recommend that you do a longer proof and rise in your refrigerator, where you let that dough develop over like 12 to 20 hours in your refrigerator. I have tried that a couple of times. I'm curious, some people say they get a better rise and nice bubbles, better bubbles in their bread. The only reason I don't do that is because I usually don't have room in my fridge for 2 big loaves that are going in the fridge that want to expand. My fridge is packed. So I have stuck with just doing a room rise and proof. So I let it rise. Once it has risen, then I had a nice big batch, and I divided it up into 2 loaves, put them each in their own bowl, let it proof for about an hour more before I stuck it in the oven. So that is your step. Mix your sourdough starter, you have your culture going. The day you're making your bread, you're gonna excerpt or cut off the piece or measure out the piece you want towards your dough. You're going to feed and reserve the rest back in the fridge. Then you're ready to mix your dough. And again, just depending on how you're doing it, it could be used for lots of different things. As I mentioned, doesn't need to be bread. But if you're going to do bread, you're going to mix all your ingredients. You're going to have an autolyze. You're going to have a long rise, and then a proof, and then a bake. So everybody got it? Sounds like a lot of steps, but once you do it a couple of times, it starts to become a rhythm. Also, you can decide when you want to do this. It seems like a lot of steps, but a lot of times you can be doing other things while all this is happening. So I will often, like this batch that I'm going to show you in a few minutes, I'm going to take home. It's going to rise tonight. Then I'm going to stick it in the fridge overnight because I can, and because I'm not going to stay up to bake till 11 or 12 o'clock tonight. And I will take it out and let it proof in the morning, so that last little rise in the morning, and I'll bake it in the morning. So you can do it on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning. You can arrange it, right, so that it fits your schedule, is my point. All right. Yes, so the salt is going to be at the rise step. So in other words, you will find recipes that tell you can just mix all the ingredients from the get-go. Again, it's worked really well for me to not add it until the next step. So I've got this very first dough. I'm going to bring it over here, and we're going to play with it and show you some elasticity. Just take this out, and I will add the salt then. Just going to take this out now. Nice. Okay. A little bit more golden brown. All right. Yeah, we can turn that off. All the way? Yeah, all the way. All right. So here are some possible issues you may run into. Why is your culture not rising? Is it not getting bubbly? Again, temperature, 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 not just time. So don't be afraid if it's taking longer. A couple things you can do. So they do make proofing ovens. So if you really get into, I didn't add that to the nice to have list, but if you really get into doing this, you would actually buy a little proofing box. It's like a miniature, it looks like a dehydrator. And it keeps your dough at a consistent like 70, you can probably set it 70 to 78 degrees. I sometimes put the dough in the bowl, like I have a range stovetop altogether, right? Not a oven like that. And I will put the dough in my bowl and turn my oven on the lowest setting, so like 170, and it makes it really nice and warm, and the dough is sitting there, and so it will rise a little bit faster. Or you can, if you have a modern electric oven, the one that has like an induction surface, or it has like the flat ceramic surface, a lot of those newer ovens have a proofing setting on them. So if you live, or if you are in a place or you buy a new stove, oftentimes they will have a temperature, and that lets you basically set your oven at a lower temperature, because most of the time they don't go below, 175 or something is the lowest you get to bake, right? So that proof setting on a newer oven allows you to actually set your oven at a really low temp and allow it to be warm enough to rise. Okay, if you let it sit too long, it could like expand and then flatten. Not a big deal. If it like goes up and then you go back to feed it and it's like sunk down again, no problem. Just feed it as normal. That is totally normal. Don't be worried that you killed your sourdough starter. You didn't, trust me. This is something I wanted to show you, so hopefully you can all get a picture of this, but this was one of the cultures that I was developing using rye flour. So when you are working with whole grain flours, as I was mentioning, those can often give you a stronger sour flavor or tangier flour to your dough. They will dry out on their surface. So even though I had these covered with a linen towel in my kitchen, like the ones that I was doing with rye and whole wheat, they really developed this crust on top. And you might think, oh my God, oh no, it's not good. It's not. Just honestly, it's like the skin that develops on pudding or custard. You can just take a spoon and lift it right off, and then mix and measure and feed your dough as normal. So don't be worried that you did anything wrong. That's pretty typical, especially when you're dealing with those like heavier whole grain flours. If you leave it in your fridge for a long time, again, you can get that liquid development where it starts to separate a little bit. Most of the time, if it's a week or 2 or even 3, you can just re-stir it again. Again, you want to feed it, bring it back to room temperature, and that's when you want to do your measurement, add your water and your flour, and feed it. or it's not sour enough. Again, think about what you're using to feed your dough, what type of flour you're using, or again, the option of adding just a tiny bit, maybe a teaspoon of vinegar. If you have any off colors or off smells, please discard. Has everybody got that? Can anybody think of anything else that maybe I didn't think of? That like, okay, so another thing that might happen is you might have your dough proofing and you go to put it in the oven, and instead of like bouncing up like these loaves that we have here, it might spread out and get flat. That means your dough was overproofed, which means it just sat out a little bit too long. So like all the air escaped out of it before you actually got it in the oven. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. It's still totally edible. It's not going to be light and fluffy like maybe you were aiming for. Don't throw it out. Use it for breadcrumbs, make croutons out of it. I mean, there's other things you can use it for, so don't totally throw it away, even if it's not the perfect loaf that you were hoping for, okay? All right. All right, I think I went over this already. Does anybody else have any questions about the feeding piece and keeping it in the refrigerator? Yeah, please, I see cameras going up, so lots of pictures being taken. All right.
As a gentle reminder, this will be on our YouTube page. So everything you're seeing here, you can easily go back to. You know, if you ever go on to youtube.com, there's a search kind of bar right in the middle. You can just type in Griffin Health and you're going to see a video playlist. So all of these talks that we've done will be there. This usually gets uploaded by the end of tonight by Josh, our magnificent producer in the background, making all the camera magic happen. So he works for food basically, so we have to feed him after this.
We feed him well, don't worry.
He comes looking around like, okay, what's mine, you know, type thing. But yeah, so I know a lot of you have been looking at the screenshots, which are great, but again, just to remind you, all of this will be there. And if for some reason someone has trouble getting to that, I can easily help with that. So.
Okay. So I just want to show you these last two slides, then we'll switch back over to the overhead cameras and I will show you the feeding, and we'll also do a little turn of that first round of dough that we mixed at the very beginning, so that auto-lyse stage. All right, so again, if you want to do, I know we've done things out of order, this is a great summary for you, so if you wanted to take a picture of this, this would be the time to do it. This again is one of those multi-grain loaves. It's got, you can tell, it's got some nice air pockets throughout, but it's not big like you would see in a white flour loaf, right? It just means it's made with whole grain. Has everybody got this who needs this?
Not yet.
Okay.
And,
All right, and then the last is, I definitely want to share this with you because you will find many.
like that, Doc.
These are resources and websites I have gone back to time and time again. So as I was mentioning, it's not the end all be all, but I do find that King Arthur Flour has a great set of videos, instructions for developing the starter, maintaining it, bread recipes, as well as discard recipes. So I really encourage, that seems to be. And then Farmhouse on Boone is a website I found, a young woman who makes all sourdough for her family, and she has some wonderful discard recipes, and I love it that they're like savory and sweet. We don't eat a lot of sweets in my household, but she's got great recipes for like a pot pie where you use your recipe discard to make a top, you know, basically using your sourdough discard. I tried that one this week. It was amazing. We had biscuits, old style like biscuits with the sourdough starter. Man, they got really nice and high. I made this coffee cake for you, pasta recipes, waffles, pancakes, sandwich rolls, you name it. She's got like 30 to 40 different recipes for both sourdough and also the sourdough discard. Cultures for Health, Breadtopia are places where you can buy a culture. So if you let this one go that we're giving you tonight, or if you feel like you haven't fed it and it's not good and you want to buy one, these are places where you can go where there's some tutorials online, not quite as comprehensive as the others, but there are places where you can get starters as well. And then the Clever Carrot, she's just a blogger. She's got some nice videos as well that go along with actually making your bread. All right, so definitely wanted to share those with you. Having said that, Josh, if you can hear me now, I'm going to switch off of the presentation and I'm going to show, I'm going to turn, yeah, okay. So I'm going to auto-lyse this dough, and then the last step I will show you is just the measuring and feeding. So that, and then Mike, maybe while I'm doing that, you can actually hand out. So the bag in the fridge has all of the starters. All right, so is this where everybody can see on the cameras? Okay, so I want to have some flour ready because this is going to be a little sticky. I'm not feeding it, no. Feeding is only at this stage. So this is my bread dough already mixed. I have taken the starter and I have added water and flour, and before I forget, I will add my salt because I'm gonna mix it in, and it's 2.5 teaspoons for this double batch. So. By the way, you can feel free to taste your dough as well. I feel like my husband and I are kind of saltaholics, meaning like I will put the salt in that the recipe calls for, and then I find myself adding like another half a teaspoon or something. All right, so what I am doing with flour on my fingers, because again, this is sticky at this stage, is I'm pulling and stretching and like folding it over on itself. Can you guys all see that on the camera? Okay, cool. I added the salt, so while I'm doing it, the salt is getting mixed in. And again, not really kneading, but just kind of folding it over. And this is helping build that elasticity in the dough. And what I'm going to do is, what I was going to try to do was like turn it over. You can also switch it to a different bowl if you want, because now this first bowl that you mixed it in is going to be quite sticky. That's okay. I mean, I usually just keep it in the same bowl. I like to do fewer dishes, so I don't mind keeping it in the same bowl. So I'm just doing this because I want that salt to get incorporated. But again, it's just a very gentle folding. And when you're doing that, and I'm going to do it a couple more times before it starts to do its rise, what's happening is the gluten is getting activated and the salt's getting incorporated. And it'll get smoother each time that I do it. It'll like develop that nice little sheen. It'll become less shaggy, less sticky. Let me wash my hands. And the last step we're going to show you is how to feed your culture. So just to reiterate, sorry, I'll turn back around.
Katie's washing her hands. Any questions? Yes, we have a question.
I would cover it with a lid, because what you're trying to do is you want to prevent it from drying out. Yeah. So, I mean, you can do saran wrap or something like that, but you don't want it to dry out in the fridge. I had linen napkins on these because I was developing them and they were just out on the counter. But as soon as I put these in the fridge to store for later, I'm going to put lids on all of them. Yeah.
So that's a great question, yeah.
Yeah. Any others? No oil.
No oil.
You
in
can
sourdough
find
bread.
recipes that add oil. That's fine. But you don't need oil. Yeah. You don't need oil. You don't need butter. You don't need milk. You can actually make, I mean, a lot of people have dairy intolerance, so you can make fantastic bread and not have to add any milk to it or dairy. Yeah. Any others before? Okay. So what I started to say was, just as a reminder, this is the dough that is at the autolyze stage. Ow, that's still quite hot. So I'm going to, the instructions that you have, and you will find varying recipes that call for varying steps, right? Sometimes the autolyze is like once or twice. Sometimes it's once and then it goes right into a rise or a proof, and they tell you to like turn it after 2 times and let it rise for like an hour or 2. So these are all going to be different steps to get you to the same end result. The autolyze is really just the initial step that was activating that gluten. My preference, and what you are tasting here today, is autolyze 3 times, which means I'm folding and turning that dough once, letting it sit for 30 minutes, a second time, 30 minutes, and then a third time. And then that's when I did, turned it into a fresh bowl and in a warm spot, and I'm waiting for it to double in rise. That's that long rise. So that's what you are eating here today. I find that is simpler. I was actually looking at the instructions that I shared with you again. I was like, this really seems confusing to me. So if you want to jot that down, I think that's a little bit easier. And you may find a simpler recipe as well, where you're just adding everything all at once and there's one turn of the dough and then you do a light knead and it goes right into your rise and then your proof. So find simple to start with. The hard part is developing the culture, and we've done that for you today. That's the tough part. Now you just need to keep it going. So I'm going to show you how to do that. All right, so again, I was mixing in these. I'll move over so that you guys can see me. Sometimes I get lazy, right? And so I was mixing right in these, but you can certainly turn it into a bowl, because like trying to stir down in a deep vessel that you're watching your ingredients rise in can sometimes be difficult, and you want to make sure that all of your ingredients get incorporated. So you don't want, like, if you wind up with a chunk of flour, you will get that hard chunk in your starter, and you want to try to avoid that. So I'm going to do it in a bowl for you. So I've got our developed culture, and I'm just going to measure out 1/2 cup. This is for your weekly feed or bi-weekly, whatever you decide. And it says, most recipes say a scant 1/2 cup. So like, you see how thick and doughy this is. You guys aren't eating this, so sorry, I didn't put new gloves on. I'm just going to use my hands. Taking this home. This one's going to be mine. All right, 1/2 cup. And you can take this opportunity to like fully empty out your vessel, give it a good clean, or switch over to a clean jar, whatever's easiest for you so that you can keep track. And I want 1/2 cup of water and a cup of flour. So I'm going to do it a little bit warm, because I find that helps sort of keep it in that development phase. In other words, you don't want to add cold water. Cool maybe, but not cold. You also don't want to add hot, because you don't want the hot water to kill the natural yeast development. So yeah, it shouldn't be bath temperature. Do not do that. So for right now, what's left in here, yes, that can be my discard. It can go in the refrigerator, and I'm going to say something about that in the moment, because I want to tell you what to do with it. Yeah. Yeah.
So the two questions that came out were, what are we doing with what's left in the jar? And Katie's going to get to that in a second.
Yeah. So I'm just going to, this is my 1/4 cup measure, which I've been using. So I started out and I had this full, 12 pounds. So 12 pounds fed those 5 starters for 10 days, which is pretty good. All right. I said mix the liquid in together first, and then I'm going to add a cup of flour. And that is going to be my next round.
So Katie, just to clarify, that's just the mixture you pulled out of the jar.
Yep. It's my culture.
And your warm water.
Yeah. This is just the culture, 1/2 cup of culture, 1/2 cup of liquid. And then I'm going to add a cup of flour.
And that's not a bread.
No, this is just, I'm feeding the culture. I'm just feeding my culture so I can put it back in the fridge and have some for next week. 2. 3. You don't have to wait a week. So that's a very good question. 4. You don't have to wait a week. You can do it in a few days. Your sourdough culture is now made. If you want to make bread again in 2 or 3 days, you can totally do that. The way to check and see if it is good is take it out, leave it at room temperature. You get some nice bubbles on the surface, has a nice smell. There is something that you can try to see if it's ready to use in baking called the float test, where you take a teaspoon of your sourdough culture, your starter, and drop it into a glass and see if it floats. However, it's not foolproof. So use it. If you see the bubbles on top after you bring it to room temperature, good chances are it's totally fine to use. These starters that I gave you that I was working with, they were quite dense. I was a little concerned that when I was baking the bread, it was going to be heavy and not get this nice rise. It was fine. It was great. Okay, this one, if you guys can see this on the overhead camera, this is a little tiny bit dry. In other words, I'm not quite getting all of the dry ingredients incorporated, so I'm just going to add like a teaspoon more of water because you don't want any dry pockets in your dough. You want all the dry ingredients incorporated. It can even be a little on the liquidy side. That's not a bad thing, but you don't want any dry ingredients because they will not break down if there's not enough liquid to absorb them. So this is great. So this is a bit shaggy and heavy. As I said, it could even be, some people work with a sponge, which is really just a more liquidy version of a sourdough starter. So now this is going to be my culture. I have now fed it. I'm going to put it back in the refrigerator. I would say at least give it a few days, or if you want to use it sooner, you can also just leave it out on the counter and feed it, right? If you want to use it sooner than a week, I was using a week as an approximation for baking a loaf of bread. If you want to use it sooner, you can put it out in the jar, leave it out on the counter, let it develop overnight, and then it will be nice and bubbly again. So that is your fed starter. It will go back into a clean jar. Maybe I'll put it in, rinse one of these out, and I'll put that back in here. Discard. Okay, couple of notes on discard. So you can throw these out. You can keep a container in the fridge and put your discards in there. And again, I was talking about different recipes you can use them in. If you are going to pour this off and not keep it at all, be very careful about putting it down your kitchen drain. This is very thick and heavy. I would not want you to clog up your kitchen drain. If you run a lot of water in it and let it sit for a few minutes, then it's fine, right? It's very thinned out. It'll go down like a thick sauce. But do not dump this into your kitchen drain the way it is. I mean, this is the stuff they use, like flour and water makes concrete, basically, yes. So you could throw it in your throw it in your garbage can. If you're afraid about that, again, you can add more liquid. You can flush it. But just be cautious and be aware of like not dumping this glob like in your kitchen drain. Wouldn't want you guys to clog your kitchen drains. Okay? Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, if I'm throwing it out, but if I want to keep it.
Yes.
So now you didn't feed that. You're just going to put it
Correct.
out all day long.
Well, I mean, it's been out for a couple of hours.
So
Yeah.
you can just put it back in the fridge.
So you can put it back in the fridge. You can measure out another half of cup and create another sourdough starter with your half a cup of water and a cup of flour and gift it to a friend or a neighbor. This is a developed culture. It is alive now. So you can keep using it. If you can't use it, you can throw it away. So you can also just store it in the refrigerator for up to 14 days and use it in a recipe like what you're going to try here today. So that's 3 options.
It can't be used again for bread.
It can be used again for bread. It is a developed culture.
So you're going to have to take your cup.
But so my point is you don't have enough there to do another starter, but. So
Yeah,
you said
I do
you
actually.
Just made, you said you could leave out a day or two and feed it daily.
Right.
To make bread.
This is just, I'm continuing, yes.
When you want to make bread in a few days and you fed that every day, all the discard you can be adding to this one?
Correct. Like I had a separate container that I was keeping in the fridge. And I had quite a bit. It was probably like 4 cups early on. That's why I wanted to make something for you. So I kept that in the fridge for about 5 days. And then I used it to make this. But there was still some left over. I threw away a little bit, not much. A lot of what I was doing was keeping it like just the last 2 days as I had all of these going, and I had that where I was measuring off and feeding. I was breaking those off and creating these for you. So they're at least a week old. Some of them are an extra day old, but those are all developed cultures for you now. You can keep them in the fridge until you're ready to use them. When you're ready to use them, I would put them in a jar, bring it, and put a little in there so there would be extra because I know it's hard to get it all out of the plastic bag. You can keep it in the fridge till you're ready, take it out, bring it to room temperature, put it in a jar, feed it. Feed it so that you are not using the entire thing in your recipe, because if you use it, then you don't have any more for the next one. So that's why you want to feed it. So feed it, I would let it sit overnight, and then you have a half a cup or a cup for your bread recipe and another cup left over to then feed and put back in your fridge for the next week. Everybody got that? Okay. All right. So we have now done our autolyze. We have now fed our feeder. I'm going to finagle these to like combine the ones that are already developed, and I'm going to put this one in here so I can write on the tape what that is. And with that, more questions, and we can continue talking, but we are going to slice these up for you, and we're going to slice up this coffee cake, and you guys can do some tasting. Hang on. And I brought my, you will also, by the way, develop your favorite tools. This bread knife I've had for 20 years. Is my favorite bread knife. I will also make another recommendation about slicing. So just one last note before Michael wraps and we sign off of anybody watching online. I used to own a bakery where we made round loaves, and people say, I can't make a sandwich with a round loaf. Yes, you can. So if you cut your loaf in diagonal pieces this way and keep going back and forth. Can you guys see that? Oh, okay. All right. Can you see here? Yes. Okay. So if you slice your loaf, your round loaf, back and forth in a herringbone fashion, you are going to wind up with much more uniform slices rather than cutting straight across, so that you will be able to have like similar size pieces, and you can make sandwiches throughout using the loaf. Is that clear? So this is our bread that we baked. You see this on camera. You've got some really nice air pockets here. Oh. Got some nice air pockets in here. So this came out really nice. I'm going to keep cutting. And then, do you want to say anything else just to wrap up?
Yeah, so, all right. Okay, so this will serve as our exiting message for the live stream portion. Obviously, you guys are all going to remain. So I just want to thank everyone for coming. We had a nice presentation tonight. I've learned a ton of things about sourdough that I never knew even existed. Katie's in the process of cutting some of that now for us to taste. Katie brought her a hummus that she made. I made a white bean dip prior to you guys coming in, so we can have a little taste with the sourdough bread. So again, I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight. We had a great presentation. Katie did a great job as always. I like the questions. We had some questions online that we answered. I want to thank those that watched on Facebook, and stay tuned for our future events that are going to be coming. We have the clean eating chicken chili next Thursday, and then in February we're going to have a whole round of things related to heart health. So we're going to sign off, Josh. Thank you everyone for being here, and we'll see you next time.
And if anybody couldn't come, it will be available so they can watch it online. And there is a lot that we went over tonight. The only way